This is Metro Week, our top story, how life on the border is portrayed in 2 new books and some old standbys. We'll interview 3 authors and a look at the year ahead in immigration policy.
Welcome to Metro Week. I'm Andrea Kelly. Innumerable authors have penned books about the border and immigration policy, and this week we talk with 3 of them. We'll begin with Nancy Montoya's interview with Michael Deere, who opposes border walls because he says they simply don't work.
The walls are porous, and we're not ever going to close them down completely. People will always find a way to go over, under, through, and around the walls.
It took Michael Deere 3 years to traverse the entire 2,000-mile U.S.-Mexico border. And during his travels, he talked with families on both sides of the border. He talked to community and business leaders, again, on both sides of the border. During his research, he came up with one basic conclusion. He says, walls won't work. Well, recently I caught up with Michael Deere right here at the border in Nogales.
Walls are basically the failure of diplomacy. When you can't come up with a peaceful solution and you don't want to go to war, you put up walls and hope for the best. It's not that they don't work ever anywhere. In fact, say the Palestine-Israeli war is quite effective at blocking movement across a very small length of land. I mean, it's not like Mexico, US, which is like 2,000 miles. The point is that wars are not in any sense a long-term solution to animosities between peoples. The Berlin Wall is perhaps the best example, it was very effective every day until it wasn't, and then it came down. And it's now a souvenir piece for some people who care to collect such things. So wars can slow people down, wars can stop people from crossing, but there's not in any way a long-term geopolitical solution, and eventually they all come down.
When you see the border and you hear about the idea of securing the border, what does that mean to you? What do those buzzwords mean?
We will never secure the border completely. That is an impossibility. People will always find their way over, under, through, and around walls. So it's not a matter of sealing the border. You can't do that. That's one of the reasons why the Senate bill, which proposed another 700 miles of border, doubling the number of Border Patrol agents again from 20 to 40,000, those solutions don't work. You don't seal the border, and infinite numbers of boots on the ground are not going to stop people who really want to come from coming.
No surprise that Michael Deere's book, Why Walls Won't Work, isn't sitting well with other writers who support more boots on the ground and continuing efforts to add to the border wall. One detractor is Gary Meinert from Green Valley. Meinert sits on the Citizens Advisory Board of the Nogales Border Patrol Station. He has penned dozens of national articles defending Border Patrol policies. His group especially takes issue with the assertion that Customs and Border Patrol have designed a system that moves illegal crossings out from the cities and into the rugged desert, which has resulted in an increase in border crossing deaths.
He said that the reason we have fences that stop outside of the communities is so that we drive the illegal aliens out into the desert where they're supposed to die. Now that is ludicrous. It's stupid. These Border Patrol agents don't want that. These guys risk their lives every day to save people.
Miner says he believes authors like Deere promote a type of reverse discrimination.
They think we're anti-immigrant, that we want only Caucasians here. I've heard that so many times, and it's so foolish. I mean, we don't want it. All we really want to do is know who's coming through our house, who's coming across our border. In the Southwest, there were 180 tunnels discovered in the last 11 years. 107 of them are within 2.5 miles of downtown Nogales. 107 of the 180.
What about that concerns you?
The fact that they can come across here and we don't have a real fix on how to stop it.
Now, immigration, drugs, and security are fundamental fundamentally important features of any nation. There's no doubt about that. And that's why the responsibility and mandate for those issues is centered in the federal government at the national level. The true epiphany was during my journeys when I spent less of my time worrying about drugs and immigration and security, and more of my time admiring the people and observing the people who lived along the border, the way they conducted their lives. I strongly believe residents who live in the border zones can quite adequately look after their own lives. They have their own sense of identities, they know what they want. They need and want specifically the damage that's been made to their communities cleaned up.
What is that damage?
Since we're sitting in Arizona, I'll tell you the most common phrase that I've encountered when talking to people about migration and other topics in Arizona is they say to me, "Welcome to the police state."
Now, Meinart agrees there are certain types of individuals who seek out to be Border Patrol or customs agents.
A lot of ex-military, a lot of people that truthfully want to be police officers, and this is a good place to start. They love what they're doing. They love trekking in the desert and doing what their job is.
Can you understand, though, the concern that many have that when you bring in ex-military into a border region who may not understand the culture, may not know the language, may not understand the community, what they know is a war zone? Can you understand the concern that you're treating the border like a war zone when it's really a community?
I understand exactly how they feel, and the Border Patrol certainly knows that problem.
Essentially, a police state has invaded our communities because our communities, I say our communities along the border, have been dumped on by federal governments and asked or invited, or more specifically told, to take the burden of solving the problems of immigration, solving the problems of security and drugs. And I don't think that this is appropriate. We do not have the authority in our communities. We do not have the mandate, the money to do this. In the meantime, we suffer. And the environment has been destroyed in building fences. The fences themselves are, of course, an onerous presence in every community. We live literally under the shadows of them. Add to that the surveillance towers, the constant border patrol, the constant interference in everyday lives of various kinds of police personnel, and you see that the walls and all the materials that go with them seriously threaten the nature of cross-border lives. If people can't cross as they would normally do to go shopping, to see their friends, or whatever it was they crossed for, if they now have to go and wait for 2 hours each way to cross, or if they now have to move from their communities to somewhere 50 or even further miles away in order to cross, then those social ties across the border have been interrupted.
But some would say, too bad. That's the price we pay for securing our country and keeping our people safe. Some would say, too bad.
I think that's what some people would say if they lived in Washington, D.C. or north of the border. The most important thing that I wish for is that everybody who wants to say anything about the border first visits the border and makes an attempt to understand what border lives mean. We can secure the border, do everything else that we want to do, and also secure the lives of borderland communities. It's not a contradiction.
Now we'll turn to a local author. Linda Valdez is a Tucson resident and a columnist for the Arizona Republic. Her book was released this month, a memoir about her marriage to her husband, an illegal immigrant at the time of their wedding. Your husband crossed the border without documentation because he felt there was little other choice. Can you explain the situation your family was in?
Absolutely. Well, the book that I wrote is basically a love story. And we met in Mexico, we fell in love, and he decided to come up here and came to Nogales. And I spent some time going down to meet him there. And we decided, okay, we're going to try to get him across the border. He did not want to cross the border illegally. And so we got the paperwork. I had to go to my boss. I was at the Arizona Daily Star at that time, and my boss was Steve Auslander. And those who know Steve know that he's not an easy sell sometimes. And he had to fill out a paper saying that I had a permanent job and was was employed there and would remain employed there, which was a little hard for him because he said no one has a permanent job, you know. So I had to talk him into that one. And we filled out the paperwork. I took it down to Nogales, and Sixto took the bus to Hermosillo to the embassy there and took it in, and he was rejected. And we went through, you know, as a journalist, and I had covered immigration for some time in the border, I felt like, you know, I know how the system works. I can figure out all of this. We went through all the right steps. We had everything down just as they told us we needed it, and they turned him down.
And that happened repeatedly.
It happened a couple times, and finally, you know, he spent about 6 months in Nogales. He was staying in a church down there, and we were sort of running out of options. And at one point, he was sort of moping around the church, and one of the other fellows there, and they had kind of made fun of him. You know, why are you going to all this trouble? Just, there's holes in the fence. Just go through a hole in the fence. And no, he wanted to do it properly. And at one point, this one fellow said, just come with me. So they went, they walked through the fence. That was it.
And you describe it almost in the same way in the book, very nonchalantly, like there's a hole, he went through it, and that's it.
And that was it, yeah.
It sounds so dramatic when we talk about that in other contexts, but in that time, it was the early 1990s, people were just doing that.
Yeah, actually 1988 it was. And yes, you could sit in the McDonald's in those days on the US side, and you could watch people come and go. And a lot of them were just coming to go shopping. It was more convenient than standing in the line. So it was much less dramatic in those days to come across the border illegally than it is now, much less lethal, definitely.
Now, did you ever get an explanation for why he was repeatedly denied, or potentially why there's no explanations given even?
They didn't say anything. They just told him no. And it's interesting. I believe it was because he fit the demographic. He was a young male, unmarried, and they figured he was going to come here and stay here. Many years later, my nephew, who lives in not Nogales, he lives in Los Mochis, also fits that demographic, and he went through the same process. He tried to get across the border and get a visa to come across the border, and they did the same thing. They denied him. We went to visit one time, and he showed me his file of all the papers, all the things that he had put together to take and show them. And he asked me why, why did they not let me cross? And I said, I can't tell you. My best guess is because he was a young man, and they thought he was not the demographic they wanted to allow in this country. It's not a fair system at all.
Now, eventually, after you were married, your husband was able to get a green card. And you also described the process of getting that. Was there any risk in writing the book? What's his status now?
He's a naturalized citizen. He's a citizen now. I don't believe there's no legal risk to him. The only risk is that sometimes people come out of the woodwork and say mean things. I got emails at my job yesterday from people who were calling Mexicans maggots and rapists and murderers, based on a little blurb I did suggesting that we not call people illegal aliens, that we use a more humane term. So, there's that risk, but that's just the risk you take when you're when you're public. Legal risk, no.
And what about to any other members of his family? Are there any other risk?
Well, I mean, there are some other members of his family who are living here illegally, but I didn't identify them in such a way anybody could find them, so.
Right.
And I guess I shouldn't have said that, should I? I don't think there's any risk, no.
Now, I want to also revisit the moment at which, or the application process when he did get his green card. You had to travel to Tijuana for that application process, visit a doctor there, bring all kinds of documents. And in the book, you describe that office, the U.S. Embassy in Tijuana, as the new Ellis Island. I was curious if that's something that you felt when you were there, when you were going through that process, or if it's more an idea you developed in retrospect, seeing 20, almost 30 more years of immigration at the border.
I think it's something that struck me then, that evening. It took us the whole day to go through the process, and at the end of the process, we came into this room where they took our stack of documents that we had carefully collected and threw them in the trash. You got the green card and you're on your way to go. And there was a big group of people that came in. We were at the tail end of that group. And just as we were leaving, another big group of people came in, and some of the border officials, one of them said to the other one, where are they coming from? And I thought, they're coming from Mexico, and they're coming, and you better get used to it, because these are your new immigrants. So it did strike me very much at that time. And one of the reasons I wrote the book was because a lot of people in this country are so negative about Mexico, and I wanted them to be able to see, at least through my eyes, the things I discovered, what a wonderful thing it is to have those immigrants come to our country, and how much that they are contributing and will contribute to our culture.
Your story is sort of could be seen as the counterpoint to the narrative that people should get in line and do this the right way, and that's just the way this should be done. And your story is one of trying to do it that way, failing to do it that way, and then eventually getting the green card and the citizenship or naturalized citizenship. What's your response to people who say this is just one way to do it and you should just do it that way?
Because it doesn't work. It's a fallacy that there is a line somewhere that you can get into. If you're from Mexico or Central America and you want to come here, your chances are so slim of doing so legally. I mean, certainly if you have property, you can get a visa and come and shop here. But if you want to immigrate from those countries, it's very difficult. And so when people say, oh, they should get on a line and do it the right way, there is no line. And there is no right way to do it. Now that is a problem. I'm not one, I don't think illegal immigration is good in the sense that I don't think it's good to have an out-of-control border. But given the policies and the laws that we have in place right now, there are no other choices for people. And now immigration from Mexico is slowing down. Immigration from Central America, illegal immigration from Central America is increasing. And it's the same set of problems. And we're still, after all these years, have not passed comprehensive immigration reform. We've not dealt with the situation that brings most people here, which is that they're looking for jobs, and there are jobs available for them, but we still haven't dealt with that.
In your eyes, what would an appropriate comprehensive immigration reform system look like as someone who's dealt with the system?
Well, first of all, we need to deal with the population that is living here undocumented now. And there should be a process for them to go through, and that's been proposed before. They can earn legal status, eventually earn citizenship. There should be a guest worker program that is fair and that brings people here to do jobs, that doesn't undermine U.S. workers. It should be a simple process, or else you're gonna continue to have illegal immigration. And there should be tough worksite enforcement. That was part of the 1986 reform that was never really implemented. And it's what makes the current system so unfair, because we keep hardening the border and making it more and more difficult, more and more lethal for people to get across. But yet if they get across, they can still get jobs, because we don't do anything, a little here and there. We don't do much to deal with worksite enforcement. And unless there are penalties for hiring people that are undocumented, unless there's a clear system for knowing who is documented and who isn't documented, you're going to continue to have that jobs magnet, and people will continue to come here. And so that's what's so wrong about blaming the migrants. They're coming here to do jobs that are waiting for them.
That U.S. employers hire them for.
Exactly, that they get hired for, and they benefit the entire country by doing those jobs, and yet they're penalized and vilified, which is to me just so unjust and so unworthy of a country that's built on high ideals.
And finally, why did you write this book?
Well, partly because of what I was just talking about, because the image of Mexico and the Mexican immigrants, the people who come here undocumented, is so negative and so ugly and so stereotypical. And this is a different kind of immigration story. My immigration story is a different kind of immigration story, and I thought it was important for people to see that and to understand that this is a complex issue, number one, and number two, we have nothing to fear from Mexican immigration. The people who come here are bringing wonderful culture, wonderful values. We have nothing to fear from them.
Linda Valdez is author of Crossing the Line. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now back to the border with Nancy Montoya. She spoke with Luis Alberto Urrea, who's written more than a dozen books of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry, all about the borderlands. He broaches politics and culture at the line between the U.S. and Mexico.
Now, it's one thing to write about the border after you've done your research and perhaps made a few trips here. It's quite another thing to have been born on the border and then write about it. Luis Urrea grew up with feet planted firmly in two countries. His mother is American, his father Mexican, and he spent his childhood between Tijuana and San Diego. So, when Luis Urrea writes about the border and immigration issues, he writes from a very personal perspective.
These guys writing these My Day at the Zoo books, you know, they come down to Tucson or to El Paso and they look around and then they go home and write a piece, you know. Suddenly New York discovers it and it's a big deal. I find that outrageous.
The border is not what people assume it is.
Urrea is a big draw at Tucson's Festival of Books, with 16 books to his credit, including his most famous work, the Pulitzer Prize-nominated The Devil's Highway. He says he never takes his good fortune for granted. For the first 10 years of his writing career, he lived in near poverty. He gained national attention in the U.S. when he wrote about the everyday lives of Mexican families living in the garbage dumps of Tijuana. Then the call that every aspiring writer hopes for.
And he said, how would you like to spend the rest of your literary life in the Little Brown family? And I remember thinking, whoa, this doesn't happen. You know, I was publishing with U of A and Cinco Puntos in El Paso, you know, my friends. And all of a sudden I thought, oh, yeah, what? You know, and I called my wife and I said, what do I do? And she said, well, don't be stupid, man. Call him back, you know.
His first major assignment for Little Brown Publishing, write about the Yuma 14. In 2001, 14 out of 26 migrants died a brutal death from exposure outside of Yuma. His book, The Devil's Highway, gave a human face to those who died. But first, he had to get around many roadblocks.
My first thought was, well, I'm going to go to Tucson and I'm going to try to talk to the consul here, Flores Vizcarra. And he was furious. And he talked about just this issue. He said, you know, Americans don't care. Americans don't care about the border. Americans don't care about us. And they don't care about the undocumented. You're only here because so many people died. And he said, so somebody somewhere is going to make money off all these people dying. And he said, but you know, this tragedy happens every single day, one at a time. Where is 60 Minutes then? Where is New York then? And I thought, I'm going to argue a point with him, and then I thought, no, I'm not. And I said, you are right. I said, people do not care, really, and people are looking for sensation. I said, but if we tell this story, we can make people care. I said, we can open their hearts, so use the tragedy to make people start to pay attention. My first challenge then with the consul was to enter the back rooms and start investigating the death packets. And he let me go back. And so I spent a long time, you know, I was sitting back there going through the files and reading the autopsy reports and studying the pictures of them and looking at their personal things. I realized I had the story because I opened, you know, the death packets have a Ziploc baggie with the people's stuff. And one of the guys, his comb was in it, and his hairs, a couple of hairs in it. And I thought, this is all that's left of this man. This family will never see him again.
Luis thought The Devil's Highway would be a book only about those who died, but it also became a book about the Border Patrol agents who found the dead. He found himself needing to tell their story as well.
I realized I'd never gone in a Border Patrol station, you know. I'd never have done that. Why would I do that? They chased some of my relatives, you know. I hate to admit that on TV. But the supervisory agent, Kenny Smith, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful man. He came out from the back and he said, what are you guys doing? I said, this guy's writing a book, you know, what are you writing about? And I told him, and I don't know, it was like a moment of grace, I think, you know. God comes in the room. Kenny just looked at me and he just had mercy, you know. He just said, you know, I sent out the run to try to find those guys. I was manning it all that day. And he just said, you know what, come with me. That was it. I was in Kenny's hands from then on. Then we ended up on the Devil's Highway, and we had this very profound talk about his soul. I'll never forget it, just telling me how it feels to do what he does. But he said, I know what you think of me. And I was like, well, what do I think of you? And he said, you think I'm a jackbooted thug. That was, you know, a ice up your spine moment, really. Because he had me, that's exactly what I thought. And then he says, you know what I really am? He said, I am your jackbooted thug in shining armor, man. Aye. And I was looking at him, you know, and he said, I'm a father. He said, you want to tell me I don't have feelings? You carry a dead 19-year-old woman 6 miles across the desert in your arms. Tell me I don't have feelings. And he just unloaded on me how he feels and who he is and what it means to him. And I honestly, he brought me to the point of tears. I have to admit it. I tell every audience this. And I said, Kenny, I love you, man. And Kenny, you know how they are. He's just standing there looking across into Mexico. And he goes, yeah, kind of like you too, buddy.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Tonight on Arizona Week, the FBI Most Wanted list features 2 men from Arizona, and both committed heinous crimes in the state.
Cold-blooded killers, and I think they fit the profile of a sociopath with very little conscience other than their own well-being. They are extremely dangerous and extremely difficult to track.
As always, the border plays a big role in state and federal politics. Christopher Conover joins me to discuss how the issue will pop up in the next state and congressional elections. So Christopher, let's just start with the bills that Senator John McCain and Congresswoman Martha McSally have introduced this session that could affect their re-election campaigns next year.
In recent weeks, they both have introduced a couple of bills. Representative McSally introduced one that directed Border Patrol and Customs to work more closely with the military to get veterans who are getting out of the military into open jobs within Customs and the Border Patrol. Senator McCain has a Border Patrol-related bill to get more Border Patrol officers in rural areas, and then he also has a bill demanding that the federal government pay what it is supposed to pay the states for incarcerating people who are picked up illegally or suspected of illegally crossing the border. That's been an issue for years. Governor Napolitano, when I got here 10 years ago, was having that same fight with the federal government.
And so we could see their opponents either in primaries or in the general elections using those bills as fodder during the campaign.
I'm sure they will come up, and the two of them will use them right back. This is what I'm doing to try and help secure the border, bring more money into the state, that type of thing.
And then in some of our state elections, maybe for legislative races, there's been an effort by the state in the past few years to try and build sections of the border wall that the state says Border Patrol hasn't built. Why did that effort fail this year?
That effort failed because it never really went anywhere. It was a law that was passed. The state was allowed to raise private dollars to build a fence or build a wall, sections of it. And they got some money, but they just never got enough to build anything of note, so they never did. And this year they finally gave up on that effort.
Okay, and in our last minute, I want to check in on the border strike force that Governor Doug Ducey introduced a few weeks ago, and we've talked about it on Metro Week. There was some controversy. Some border sheriffs didn't really like it. Other border sheriffs did. Have we heard anything new on that?
The controversy continues. The governor is meeting this week with the border sheriffs here in Tucson, as a matter of fact, to hear about their concerns. We'll see what comes out of that meeting. That is a closed-door meeting. We asked to go in, and they said no. But we'll see what comes out of that. We will hear more about this in the governor's State of the State address, I am sure, in January as he begins to push that legislation to get the money. He wants tens of millions of dollars for that.
And of course, we'll be checking in with you as the legislature does its business on any immigration and border bills and other bills that come up during the next session. Thank you so much for coming in and joining us today, and we'll be hearing from you next session. As always, you can catch up on news or comment on our work by visiting our website. For the next 2 weeks, we'll be away for special holiday programming. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again in January.